He used to say I was his angel. He said God gave me to him special. But angels don't get locked in bedrooms. Angels don't bleed in silence. My name's June Delacroix. I'm 78 years old, born and raised right here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I live in a little white house with green shutters that my daddy built in '49. Folks say I've always had a soft voice and a stubborn soul. I reckon that's true. Most people round here know me as Miss June from the church kitchen. I've been making pecan pies and folding altar cloths since I was old enough to stand on a stool. But there's another part of me most folks don't know. I was 8 the first time he called me Angel. My grandpa, Mama's daddy, he smelled like tobacco and Old Spice. Sat in the same pew every Sunday. Folks called him a man of God. I called him Paw Paw. He'd pick me up after school when Mama had late shifts. He'd say, "Come on, Angel, let's go home." And I'd follow him, not knowing what that word would come to mean. He told me secrets were holy, said silence was proof I was good. And I carried that silence like it was scripture, deep, folded, sacred, for almost 70 years. But now I'm here. I've got breath left in these lungs, and I ain't wasting it. I'm June from Baton Rouge, and this is my truth. If you hear something in my story that sounds like home, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments. I want to know I ain't the only one still standing. Hit that like button if truth matters more. Then comfort. And subscribe if you believe in listening to the voices time tried to bury. I was 8 when the door first clicked closed behind me. It was just Paw Paw and me in that small bedroom off the living room, the one with pale yellow wallpaper and lace curtains. Mama had gone to the store for milk, and I was supposed to finish my homework before supper. But Paw Paw said, "Come on, Angel, come sit with me." I should have run, but his voice was gentle, comforting, like a lullaby I'd heard since I was born. He brushed my hair as I sat on his lap. The radio was playing old gospel hymns, Amazing Grace, and Softly and Tenderly. The words washed over me like rain, and I felt safe, until I didn't. His hand moved from my hair to my shoulder, then lower. I froze, like a bird caught in bright headlights. He whispered against my ear, "Shh, nobody has to know. This is our secret." He led me into the closet by the bed, shut the door, locked it, then clicked it again so the lock would act like normal. Angel, he called me, like I was holy. But angels don't cry behind locked doors. He felt older then, his skin creased in the dim light, his hands trembling. I wanted to run, but I couldn't move. Wanting wasn't enough. "Paw Paw," I whispered. He said, "Angels don't speak unless spoken to." And then he touched me again. That's when I learned silence. When Mama came back, she found the door shut and me pressed in the corner. Paw Paw sitting in his chair, smiling like everything was fine. "June, you okay?" she said through the door. I nodded. Mom barely squeezed the knob, one click, and walked away. Dinner's ready. That was the first day I learned that locks were not always meant to keep danger out, but to hold it in. I lived 9 years before I'd hear the sound of a click and not freeze. School was supposed to feel safe. In my mind, it did. Until it didn't. I was 9, carrying the weight of a lock in my bones. My school desk sat under a window that faced the playground, but I didn't look outside much. My eyes were trained on the chalkboard, the wings of the teacher's dress, the blur of chalk dust whenever she erased. Miss Velma was kind. She'd say, "June, you got such pretty handwriting." I'd smile, though my inside felt like a storm. I started raising my hand less. I figured the louder I spoke, the more I'd speak wrong, so I stayed small. That winter, the bruises started. They weren't hidden in the way scars are. They showed on my forearms when I wore short sleeves. Some. Afternoons, I wrote my lessons with my sleeve pulled low. I told Mama I'd bumped into the table. She always kissed the mark, said, "Just take care of yourself, baby." I'd nod. At recess, I kissed my knuckles against the swing's chain so the sting wouldn't spread. The other kids asked if I wanted to play. I said, "Not today." And when the others laughed, I kept swinging, seeing their feet only as punctuation under my seat. One cloudy afternoon, I stayed in after school with Miss Velma. She said she needed help erasing the board. Chalk dust flew. When I lifted the eraser, my sleeve slipped. The bruise was dark, blue and purple. She stopped mid-swipe and gazed at it. "June, what happened?" I squeezed my eyes shut. I heard her voice behind me, gentle, waiting. Instead of lying, I whispered, "I fell." She didn't press further. She just nodded and said, "If you need someone to talk to, I'm here." I nodded again. I left the classroom with my chest tight. Her kindness felt like a bridge I wasn't sure I could cross. That evening, Mama made jambalaya, and I sat at the table pretending to be hungry. Pawpaw didn't come by our kitchen anymore, but the memory of that locked door stayed with me. It dripped into my bones and colored every time my coat hugged me as tight as he did. I tried to talk to Mama about school, but I mostly talked about what we'd studied: fractions, spelling tests, geography. I never mentioned the bruise. I never mentioned the fear. But one night, I started crying. After I fell asleep. I didn't want to wake Mama, so I sat up, knees drawn, and whispered into the dark, "Why didn't you hurt me? Who do I tell?" The silence answered. The next day, I carried that bruise to school again, pulling sleeves over it like a prayer. But something had changed in me. I didn't want to cry, not even silent tears. I raised my hand once when the teacher asked who had memorized their poem. I stood to read, "I am a leaf blown free. I am a dream set free." My voice wavered. When I sat, Miss Velma whispered, "Good job, sugar." And I smiled because I thought maybe the bridge wasn't as far as I feared. At recess, Tammy Jackson asked if she could push me on the swing. We'd barely spoken before, but that bruise broke something between us. We didn't need words. She just did. That day, I learned that people trusted bruises they could see. What they didn't see, they dismissed. But even unseen locks and whispers leave scars. That afternoon, after supper, I sat on the porch and dug in the dirt. I wrote in my journal, "Bruises disappear, even broken locks rust." But my story? That stays in chalk dust and worn pages. I saved the page, tucked it under the floorboard behind my closet, the same place I kept the diary about Pawpaw. I wanted a record of the truth, in my handwriting, even if no one else read it. Days passed, weeks, until the bruise faded. But the ache in my chest didn't. I told Mama I had a stomach ache and she took me to the doctor. He asked questions about school. When I told him I slipped, he listened, didn't press, just gave me medicine and said, "Whatever it was, you heal in your own time." When we got home, Mama asked, "Are you hurt here?" and tapped her own shoulder. I nodded. "I'm with you," she said. "Always." I wondered if she meant it for real, or if she just chose words she felt safe repeating. At school, my English teacher announced a poetry contest. I wrote about a locked door, about an angel who forgot how to speak, about chalk dust that settled in the lungs. I edged the page with crayon, submitted it. It won an honorable mention. Not enough to read in chapel, but enough for Miss Velma to say, "Your words got wings, June." That felt like a whisper of hope. Bullied? A few kids started asking why I couldn't play. One called me crybaby. But when I held my ground, when I said, "I'm okay," they left me be. They didn't know that even a whisper can sound like thunder when you need it to. That winter, another bruise appeared on my arm. He came back once. I could hear the click. I knew the dark. She found me humming to calm my hands. "Come inside," she said. I did. I took off my coat. The bruise stood out. She stared at it. You'd think she was seeing me for real for the first time. I didn't say anything. She gestured for me to sit. "Tell me." That word stood between silence and safety. I stayed silent, but the door she cracked inside me stayed open a little longer after. School taught me facts, but home taught me fear. I was 10 when the blanket changed. It belonged to Mama, a soft quilt sewn from scraps of her Sunday dresses. When she tucked me in at night, she'd wrap me in it and whisper, "Sleep tight, Angel." For years it felt safe, like a hug straight from her heart. But one night, I woke to Pawpaw kneeling by my bed. My breath caught when he reached under the quilt, his fingers brushing my ankle. My body froze in the dark. The quilt tangled around me while he spoke in a hush. "Shh, nobody needs to know." He pulled me out of bed and into the living room. I didn't have strength, didn't know where I was, didn't know how to stop believing his lies, that this was love or holiness or my duty. "You're safe with me," he said, leading me to the rocking chair. The blanket slipped from my shoulders. I couldn't move. He closed curtains, turned off lamps. He touched me under that blanket until it was April, and I knew nothing about spring again. When he was done, he carried me upstairs, tucked me back in, and put the quilt over me, whispered, "Our secret angel," and left. The blanket kept the night alive. That Sunday, the church sermon was from Isaiah. "He will cover you with his feathers." Mama always talked biblical comfort. I didn't hear feathers. I heard fabric that smelled like home but hurt like memory. At breakfast, Mama asked about school. I answered confused, ate grits, felt empty. Pawpaw, when he came in, silent. I realized he stayed away from morning rituals so they wouldn't blow our normal. He held his Bible like an olive branch, palm pressed to leather, spine worn from memory. He spoke of gospel, of purity, of grace, but not of me. That afternoon, I took the blanket to my secret diary. In trembling letters I wrote, "The quilt that held me now hides me. The book that blessed me now calls me quiet. I am lost in holy things that hide sins." I pressed the pages together, folded it, and closed the cover. At school the next week, in art class, we painted. I drew a house, yellow bricks, a blue door, a tree outside. I painted the quilt, white and green, draped on a chair. I painted the Bible, brown cover, red cross, on the table next to a padlock, and in the window, a little girl inside, shaped like a lock. Miss Velma said it was beautiful. Everyone applauded. I sat silent, but inside something cracked, a whisper. Art can unlock things too. That night I held the blanket close, then folded it carefully and put it away. Not to hide, but to hold space for something else on its place. The Bible became a burden. At Sunday school, I held it tight as others sang. I pressed my thumbs where ink had stained. I flipped to Psalms and got stuck on, "He heals the broken-hearted." But no one ever said, except when they lock them in with the people they trust. Mama started noticing the shift. "I don't sleep good," I told her. That was all I could say. She held me then. Real holding, no whispering. I leaned into her shoulder. Let her feel the weight I carried. No words. Just two people in a quilt of absence and a Bible of brokenness. At 10, I understood this. Symbols aren't always sacred. They can be grounded with shame. And sometimes an eagle-eyed child sees that truth first. The door to that back bedroom had a stubborn lock. It wasn't just wood and metal, but a symbol of a promise broken. I was 11 when I realized the door no longer protected me. It protected him. Mama and I sat at the kitchen table one Sunday afternoon. She held a stack of quilt scraps. I had my diary open to the blank page. The silence between us had finally gotten loud enough to fill the room. She slid a scrap paper, embroidered, fraying, across the table. "You carrying his quilt upstairs, aren't you?" I looked at the paper, then at her. I shook my head. though I had. I thought, maybe I could fix it. She closed her eyes. You can't fix a promise someone broke. I wanted to cry. I didn't, though. When I went to church next, I walked right past that locked door. In the hallway, crowds of people, hymns echoing, pastel Sunday dresses and polished shoes. They all felt like they belonged somewhere I didn't. I sat alone that morning, didn't offer to help with morning tea, didn't sing, just listened. The pastor talked about women of strength in the Bible, but not the ones whose hearts broke behind closed doors. Roy, our new Sunday deacon, walked by and paused. You all right, June? He said, but didn't wait for an answer. I wasn't. Harmony and hymnals sounded empty. At home, Papa stopped coming to the house. He walked to the store, sat on a bench outside, smoked his cigarettes. He didn't need to say much. The unspoken weight was enough. Mama tried to cleanse the room once. Black soap, vinegar, lemon. She left the door wide open and stood back, but didn't go in. She told me, some rooms stay locked, even when the key's gone. That afternoon, I visited my friend Tammy. We sat on her front step under azalea bushes. I told her about how the door stayed closed even when the man went away. She listened and said, some doors, you gotta build new ones. A builder's metaphor from a 9-year-old friend. I smiled. That night, I wrote in my diary, the doors he locked still whisper his name, but walls don't decide who lives inside. I pressed on the page, put the diary under my pillow. The next Sunday, I walked to that door, not to open it, but to touch the frame, felt the rough wood, the splintered paint, the badge of broken trust. I laid a wee flower I'd picked, a small white daisy, beside the hinge. The simple act rippled through me like a prayer. School became easier. Miss Velma said, you've grown stronger, child. I told small lies like, I'm fine, less. I didn't speak of the locked room, but I didn't hide from it either. Mama began sleeping in that room sometimes, at least the spare bed in there, against her soft prayers. I didn't ask. She never said why. One afternoon, I knocked on the bedroom door. She opened it slowly. We didn't mention what happened. We didn't talk about quilt or lock or pawpaw, but we both knew we'd touched something real. I started volunteering after school at church, helping set tables. I placed my hand gently against that same door, at a safe distance, and smiled at the thought that maybe one day I'd walk past it without flinching. That Sunday, when the pastor spoke about new beginnings, I thought about the door that stayed closed. He said forgiveness didn't require forgetting. I didn't shout, Amen, but I closed my eyes, and that was enough. For the first time, the door didn't seem so heavy. I turned 12 that spring, right before the azaleas bloom in Baton Rouge. Miss Velma says middle school is about becoming someone. I don't feel like someone, just another quiet girl wearing a longing for normal in her chest. The quilt, the one Pawpaw used at night, sits folded in my closet. I never sleep with it. I never look at it. It smells like tears and cedar. Sometimes I sneak a breath when I run my finger along its edge, a reminder that comforts can turn into cages. One Saturday, Mama surprises me. She opens my closet, unfolds the quilt, and shakes it out like she's airing out old regrets. She smooths it on my bed and sits across from me. I think it's time, she says. Time for what, I wonder. She touches the fabric, to remember what it was and what it wasn't. A few days later, our church hosts a mother-daughter brunch. Everyone brings casseroles and corsages and smiles made of good homes. Everyone wears spring. Me? I wear the quilt. Wrapped tight around me, it feels like I'm carrying both memory and power. I hold Mama's hand between table and door, hoping someone notices both the bright comfort and the faint sorrow in my eyes. People ask, "Are you okay?" I answer, "I'm here." It's the first honest answer I've given in a long time. Later, I take the quilt home and stitch a simple cross. Nothing fancy, just red thread where I decide God can still heal these seams. That afternoon, I put the quilt back in my closet, folded neat and whole, and something inside me grows quiet and confident in the way a seed learns to push through dirt. School shifts. New boys laugh louder. Girls trade gossip like glitter. One girl, Sarah Jensen, 12, brave, loud, asks if I'll walk home with her. I say yes. We don't talk about the quilt. We talk about music and math and how it's weird to like wiggling angles in geometry. I laugh. My voice sounds different, lighter. That night, I dream of azaleas. One Sunday, I bring my quilt to church. Not on me, but draped over a pew. I whisper a prayer. Thank you for the comfort. Thank you for the way out. Reverend Page preaches on restoration. He says, "The Lord brings old things back anew." I close my eyes and picture that quilt becoming a banner instead of a burden. Classes end. I win second place in a poetry contest. My poem reads, "Grandpa's quilt hung heavy in my ribs, rigged with shadows, trapped in what was felt but Mama's stitch." In crimson red, "Sowed hope upon a heart that knelt." I read it at youth chapel and watch young faces twist with feelings they can't name. That feels holy. At home, Mama and I stretch quilt on the porch like a flag. No words, just presence. I place my hand on it and feel the weight of softness and silence finally becoming something like choice. That night, I write in my diary, "Quilt no longer hides me. Quilt holds me, felt and free." Months later, Pawpaw returns during a family picnic. He's polite, but quiet, like he doesn't know how to stand under the summertime light again. I carry the quilt with me, wrapped around my shoulders. When he asks if he can hold it, I don't let him. I just smile, tuck it into the seat beside me, and walk away. He never tries to see me again. Under a summer storm, I lay the quilt across permeated grass, let water soak it in. When the rain stops, I lift it and shake it in the sky. Colors bright, textures gentle. I feel like I'm shaking loose the weight of silence. That night, I write, "I am remembered, I am seen, and the quilt says yes." The choir room smelled like old hymnal pages and polished wood benches. I was 13 when I first stepped inside during a rehearsal, wearing the quilt folded over my arm. Miss Dolores, the choir director, offered me a seat beside her at the piano. "Ready when you are, Angel," she whispered, my pawpaw's word echoing back at me, but this time with kindness, not shame. I opened the hymnal to "Amazing Grace." My voice shook on the first note. But Miss Dolores reached over, placed her hand on my shoulder, and smiled. She said, "Take your time, June." So I did. That first phrase, "I once was lost, but now am found," felt like I'd been pulled from a well and set afloat in light. From trembling came steadiness, and from silence came melody. By the second verse, tears slipped down my cheeks, not from fear, from freedom. When the last note ended, the room was still. Then Miss Dolores closed the hymn book and said softly, "That was beautiful." And just like that, I had a voice again. Sunday came, and I sat in my pew more upright than before. The quilt was nowhere in sight. It was mine, but no longer my shield. I walked to choir rehearsal alone, heart pulsing like a hymn inside me. The first Sunday I sang, I led "Amazing Grace" in front of the congregation. My voice wavered at first, but I found rhythm. I felt every note echo through the sanctuary and into hearts I couldn't see. When the final verse ended, the church stayed silent a fraction longer than expected. Then they clapped, not out of obligation, but out of recognition. They heard my heart. After service, Sister May came running up, eyes bright. "I've never heard anything like that," she said. "You sang God's grace back into this building." I thanked her by nodding. That afternoon, Mama told me she'd never been more proud. She meant that in a way she couldn't say before, from a heart that had learned to feel again. In the following weeks, I attended choir practices. Letter by letter, note by note, voice by voice, I found myself again. The church became less place of secrets and more place of sanctuary. One Sunday evening, after practice, Miss Dolores slipped me a folded note. "Your voice is a light. Don't hide it anymore." I read it later by my bedside lamp. It glowed like a promise. At school, English class welcomed poems that began with music instead of trauma. I listened to band notes and scribbled lines on my notebooks. Margins. A classmate, biting her lip near Tina, said, "You sound like an angel, June." I smiled, and inside, I believed it. At home, Mama hummed while cooking again. One day she handed me a plate and said, "Sing along." We sang, quietly, two voices blending. I realized then, healing wasn't just in words or songs. It was in being seen and joining together. That spring, I won first prize in the Youth Choir Festival with my rendition of "I Will Sing the Wondrous Story." I wore the quilt again, folded, behind my shoulders like wings. They announced me on stage. June Delacroix, our angel who found her song. I took a bow, voice strong enough that I knew silence no longer owned me. By the time I turned 14, I sang nearly every Sunday. Pawpaw never came to church again, but his shadow no longer blocked the light in me. One evening, I carried the quilt to the riverbank. Under the setting sun, I let the wind lift it. As it floated, I sang hymns I'd learned. My voice carried down the river, into the pines, into the world. It hadn't felt that powerful in years. That night I wrote, "First, I found my voice. Then I let it fly out into the night and watched it matter. The moment felt holy. The quilt, still folded beneath my bed. A reminder that symbols can heal as well as hurt." Summer came early that year, and I turned 14 beneath a sun so hot it felt like it was trying to burn away the last of my shadows. The choir had given me new confidence, but the river, our Mississippi River, offered something different, a reckoning. I walked its banks alone one evening, quilt folded over my arm like a comfort and a reminder. Dad and Mama never let me go down there by myself, but I needed the water's voice. I needed to tell it everything I couldn't face inside the house. I knelt on the sand, traced ripples with my fingers, and started talking to the river. You know the secrets hides in your depths. I know the smell of cedar and old wood hangs in my bones. I carry names no one whispered out loud. But water, it washes, doesn't it? I watched the water swirl around the daisies I dropped in, and for a moment I believed my sorrow dissolving. That night, I finally asked Mama about Pawpaw, why he hadn't come home after the quilt at the picnic, and her answer came soft, almost sad. "He saw you wore your power. A man like that can't stand to see a girl rise." I nodded, but inside the river roared. Her words were both balm and trial. The next day at school, I pulled out my notebook once more. I wrote, "River knows me now, knows what beast whispered at me behind closed doors, knows what light I'm building with broken hymns." A note appeared on the page afterward, in someone else's handwriting. "You're stronger than you know. Sarah Jensen." I blinked, realizing kindness could look like ink sometimes. That weekend, Pastor Page called a gathering by the river for our youth group, a baptism and reflection. I came wrapped in my quilt once more, but this time it felt less like cover and more like cloak. I listened to friends speak about faith, about choosing to be clean. One by one, girls who knew me spoke. "I'm choosing not to stay silent. I'm choosing to let go of shame. I'm choosing to be the woman I wish I'd seen then." It was like baptism all over again. Only this time, it wasn't about water wiping me clean. It was about water helping me face myself and my maker, without the quilt hiding scar-torn wings. I stepped into the current when my turn came. The Water was cool, an ache and a gift. I let it cling, watched it wash away the prayers I started writing as a child, asking for help I thought was salvation, but was courage. I came up, breath ragged. Pastor gently placed the quilt over my shoulders. "Water doesn't forget," he said, "and neither should we." I nodded. My quilt clung wet and heavy, soaked in ritual and reckoning. Back at home, Mama hung the quilt in the sun. She let each corner soak up sunlight as I stood beside her. "Shows what?" "Happens when we risk a little faith," she said. I touched the fabric, softer now, brighter. It didn't hurt anymore, not like before. When school started again, I walked differently, not louder, just steadier. I wore simple clothes, didn't announce my story, but people saw. When I passed, heads tipped. My light wasn't hidden anymore. One evening, Sarah Jensen and I started a quilters' circle by the riverbank during June. We sat under a willow and stitched cloth while the water sighed. I stitched a red cross into the quilt's hem, finally bold enough to finish what I'd started. Sarah stitched names, her grandmother, her sister, her friend. Names that used to be safe in hidden diaries. We worked and trimmed when the sun went down, speaking about what friend means, what freedom feels like, small words for the sweeping beauty of change. That night at home I wrote, "River and quilt both know me. They taught me. Grace isn't soft, it's brave." And I believed it. I was 15 that summer, and the river had become my altar. Each morning I'd walk its banks before school, humming notes from the hymns I now carried like torches inside me. Water met me in wrist pulses and sand-clinging jeans. I spoke into it and trusted it to carry my voice. One morning, my voice carried farther than I expected. Miss Dolores found me there, sat by the water's edge, notebook in hand. She cleared her throat. "You practicin'?" she asked. "I've been thinking." She smiled. "Then sing for it." I took a breath. Felt cool wind in my lungs. I sang, soft at first. "When peace like a river attendeth my way." My voice trembled, but it filled. She nodded. "Keep going." I sang the rest. Her eyes glistened, but she stayed silent, letting me find the end. When I finished, I touched my throat like I'd just felt a spark. "I hear it," she said. "You have a gift and a story." I looked at her. She slid me a folded card. "For you. Pictured, our youth choir next month. Stand with us." I opened it. My name printed. Under a rehearsal photo, another altar, another reckoning. Back home, Mama was waiting by the door. "Pawpaw walked past the river this morning," she said softly, "but he didn't call that night." I nodded. There's healing in that. I hugged her. We didn't speak more. Auditions for choir came quick. 15 girls vying for 5 solos. I stood in the school's music room, heart pounding like church bells. I sang, voice strong, but it cracked on a high note. I laughed, embarrassed but not afraid. Miss Dolores walked in, taped a golden ticket to the wall. June Delacroix, soloist, next to my name. I touched it. I cried, not from pain, from permission. That Sunday, I led the choir in "Be Still My Soul," standing beneath stained glass that caught colorful sunbeams. My voice filled the sanctuary. Each verse felt like reclaiming space. When we finished, the congregation knelt and prayed. A handful of young girls came forward afterward, tears in their eyes. One whispered, "I want your voice." I hugged her. My voice is your right, too. After the service, I walked outside and found Dad by the car. He said, "Proud of you, kid." I smiled. It felt holy. He nodded, "And I was there with you, June." Weeks passed. I practiced solos. My confidence grew like a river bending through land, slow, steady, patient. Mama took to playing piano while I rehearsed. She hummed, too, simple notes. One Sunday, We sang a duet during choir practice, harmonies wrapped around each other like prayer ribbons. Somehow, music had opened our house the way water opened my heart. At school, I began voice lessons. I collected hymn book pages, notebook entries, river photographs. Miss Dolores asked if I'd perform at the spring youth concert. I said yes. She said, "Just be you." That meant more than any directive. At the concert, I stood under a single spotlight. Music began. My voice anchored the room. When I finished, a standing ovation. I remembered freedom looked like sound. I walked off stage, heart full. Heroic moment, or just real. That night, I jotted in my journal, voice over water, voice over fear, voice over silence, voice for truth. The river whispered back, clear in my memory. High school brought mirrors, literal and figurative. Suddenly, I saw reflections of myself everywhere, in windows, in shop displays, in lockers. Reflections that questioned who I was meant to be, survivor or spirit, ghost or girl. At 16, I stood before my first full-length mirror, learning to smile at someone who'd seen too much. I tried on dresses for the junior prom, soft pink, soft pastel, each one flirting with normal life. My mom watched from the doorway, folding arms. "You look beautiful," she said, and meant it. I hesitated, then tried on a fourth dress. It felt right, light and hopeful. When I emerged, Mom's broad grin reminded me the reflection could be tender. School dances changed everything. I shied away from slow songs. I learned silence is the only comfortable partner when you're haunted. But I said goodbye to that fear in small doses. A dance with a steady friend under soft lights. No pressure, just gentle affirmations that I belonged. Choir had me performing varsity-level solos. The spotlight felt familiar, but it came at a cost. Being seen also meant being judged. People whispered, "She's that girl with the story." I tried to ignore them, but sometimes it hurt, the implication that I was defined by pain. One afternoon, cleaning the church windows before Easter Vigil, I found old hymnal inscriptions scratched into the pane. "Joy rises in pain, God writes with light." I traced them with my fingertip, symbols of faith that became anchors instead of locks. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Mirrors don't lie. Glass can hold scars, but it reflects what we become." Dad took me for a ride to the city's antique district. He bought me a framed mirror panel, simple wood, no adornment. "This is you," he said, "raw, real, worth seeing." I mounted it in my room, looked into it every morning and said, "I am here." Home became a place of light and reflection rather than darkness. Mom and I rehung my spotlight photos near the mirror. Her voice warmed when she addressed me. "June, your story isn't broken. It's proof." At school, I began writing columns for the student paper, on surviving, on self-worth, on the courage of truth. I published a poem titled "Reflections of an Angel," a nod to Pawpaw's twisted word. It went viral on campus. Kids lined up, friends came to class to say they were proud. One junior told me, "You're the bravest person I know." I held her hands and said, "You're braver." That spring, I performed at the arts showcase. My solo reflected my growth. I'm not broken glass. I'm the light through it. The auditorium was packed. When the lights dimmed, I closed my eyes and sang not for applause, but to affirm I deserved to fill every stage and mirror with my voice. Afterwards, Dad hugged me. "You're a mirror for others now," he said. "Let them see." I nodded. One evening, I stood before the mirror panel Dad gave me. I put my hand on the glass, breathed. "Angel," I whispered. Not because I believed Pawpaw, but because now I know what angels do. They rise. By the time I turned 17, I saw life in terms of walls we build and wings we choose. My wings came from moments like stepping into the choir spotlight. The walls Those were the memories I carried, hidden but unbreakable. It was spring, nearing my senior recital. I'd been practicing. Climb every mountain. The song became more than melody. It was my prayer. I held the music sheet with trembling hands, quilt folded under my arm like a talisman. Mom sat in the audience, her eyes moist but proud. When I began, climb every mountain, ford every stream. I thought of the rooms Pawpaw locked, the seconds I couldn't breathe, the Sunday mornings I sat silent. With each verse, my voice found height. My heart, a sky. I finished. Silence stretched, then applause like thunder break. Tears, not mine, splashed down. Tears of release, of belonging. My wings lifted me. Later that night, I sat alone in the recital hall, under muted lights. I touched the walls, traced the grain of the wood paneling. Walls aren't prison if you know why they stand. Mine stood to remind me of fear, but they were no longer my fortress. They were proof of survival. I wrote in my journal, "These walls held me once. My wings pushed through them. Now both live in me." At graduations and farewells, friends hugged tight. Sarah Jensen said, "Your wings gave me courage." Tammy Jackson leaned in. "You made us all fly, June. I realized wings are not for flight alone. They're bridges to lift others." It was time to leave Baton Rouge. College awaited, an unfamiliar sky. I packed the quilt folded at the bottom of my suitcase, not as armor, but as testament. My wings were my own, but I chose to carry my history with grace. Mama and Dad hugged me as I pulled away. I whispered, "Wings and walls come with me. I'm ready." My first campus morning, I dressed in light colors. I walked to the music hall, breathing in unfamiliar air. My mirror hung on the dorm wall, my reflection steady, unashamed. I sang during choir call. My wings trembled, but held steady. I belonged. When campus held first-year orientation, I volunteered. Spoke about music, about trauma, about resilience. I told them, wings don't erase the walls, but they teach us to soar anyway. Young faces listened, shared stories, held space. I found purpose in wings and walls alike. That December, I returned home, quilted blanket in hand, ready to sing in church again. They asked me to lead Amazing Grace, my wings unfurled beneath baton, my voice wrapped around stained glass hearts. After service, a few women came. Some whispered, "Thank you." One grandmother hugged me to tears. She said she was there when others locked doors, that her silence weighed heavy now, but my wings gave hers lift too. On New Year's Eve, I wrote, "I am both. Walls and wings, the place I came from and the sky I choose. Every lock I remember, every song I sing, they say I stood. And I rose." That night, I went to the riverbank. Wrapped in quilt, beneath stars, I sang, "Climb every mountain" into the hush of creation. Not alone anymore, but thankful. My wings weren't erasing the walls. They were honoring them, transforming them, carrying their lessons forward. I came home from college for Christmas break, expecting something that felt like warmth. What I didn't expect was silence. The house was quieter than I remembered, the kind of quiet that doesn't comfort, it unsettles. Mama was working late shifts at the hospital. Dad was out visiting Aunt Clara in Shreveport. The tree blinked in the corner of the living room, cheerful but alone. And me? I sat on the couch, wrapped in my quilt, staring at lights that didn't blink fast enough to distract from the ache I carried. I'd left so much behind when I went to school. Pain, memory, pieces of myself I couldn't bear to carry. But I also left one thing undone. Goodbye. A real one. The kind you say out loud. And now it was too late. Pawpaw had passed that September. Mama didn't tell me until after the funeral. He was sick a long while, she said. Didn't want to see nobody. Said he wanted to go in peace. Peace. The word curled bitter in my mouth. He died without ever hearing what I had to say, without ever facing the harm he caused, without asking, without atoning. He just disappeared. And I hated how that felt like unfinished business. The quilt tightened around my shoulders that night as I sat on the porch swing. It was cold, not freezing, but sharp enough to sting my hands. I looked up at the sky, stars faint behind clouds, and whispered to no one. You don't get to just go like that. Maybe it was childish. Maybe it was something bigger than anger, grief, confusion, justice denied. I didn't want him to suffer, but I wanted something more than silence. I wanted to reclaim the voice he took from me, not just in song, but in truth. So I wrote him a letter. Not for him, really. For me. I wrote it slow, every word etched with clarity and control. I don't forgive you because you asked. I forgive because I need the space you took back. You don't get to own this forever. I do. I folded the letter and tucked it into the folds of the quilt. Not to send, just to keep. A private monument. The next day, I walked to his old house. Boarded windows, overgrown lawn. I stood in front of it for a long while. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just stood there and breathed. I remembered the locked rooms, the smell of tobacco, the sound of his voice calling me Angel. I whispered it once. Angel. Then shook my head. No, not anymore. On the way back, I passed the river. Still, powerful. It didn't ask for permission to keep flowing. It just did. I sat on the bank for hours that day, watching the water move like it knew secrets too heavy to say. And for the first time since he died, I let myself mourn. Not for him, but for the version of me who never got to scream, never got to say stop, never got to say you broke something sacred. When I got back home, Mama was on the porch. She looked at me, real gentle, and said, "You all right?" I nodded. "You look older." I smiled. "I feel it." We sat in silence for a bit. Then I asked her, "Did he ever say anything about me before the end?" She hesitated, then said, "Only once. Said you were strong, that he didn't expect it. Didn't know how to feel about that. But strength? That I could own." Later that night, I took the letter from the quilt, unfolded it, and read it again. Then I burned it in the fireplace. Watched the paper curl and blacken. The words were still mine. But I didn't need them to live outside me anymore. Sometimes goodbye isn't loud. Sometimes it's ash in a flame, smoke rising, and a name finally set free from your tongue. That was the goodbye I missed, and the one I finally claimed. College. Graduation came with caps and gowns, diplomas, and applause. But for me, the real celebration was quiet. It was the sum of all the steps I took to claim my voice back. It didn't come with fanfare. It came with stillness and knowing. I arrived back home to Baton Rouge for a summer reunion. Just me, the quilt in the back seat, and the river waiting as it always had. I walked through my front door alone, and I could feel the weight of 12 years of living pulling behind me. The house smelled of wood, polish, and coffee. Mama was in the kitchen. Dad read the newspaper in the living room. No balloons, no banners. That was okay. Sometimes quiet is louder than celebration. We had supper on the porch. Jambalaya, garlic bread, cold iced tea in mason jars. The sky was violet and somber, like a hymn without words. Dad looked up from his plate. "June, we're proud of you." Mama smiled through tears. "You did it." I nodded, but I said nothing. I just let their voices settle around me. I folded and refolded the quilt in my lap. I thought about every Sunday I wore it like armor. Every night I heard that lock click behind me. Every time I sang in that church or spoke into the microphone when others wouldn't. This quilt? It held every broken piece. And now? It was still holding me, but not in a cage anymore. Later that night, I stepped onto the porch alone. The cicadas were singing their summer chorus. I wrapped the quilt around my shoulders and walked barefoot to the edge of the lawn. I thought about the youngest version of me hiding inside a locked room, too afraid to cry loud enough to be heard. I thought about the high school girl who stood under lights and held hymns in her throat. And I thought about the woman I'd grown into, someone who stood exactly where she needed to stand, in the spotlight of her own life. In the distance, I could hear water rushing. I walked toward it, the velvet sky overhead full of stars. I didn't need a crowd to witness it. I just folded the quilt. Around me again, let its patchwork comfort settle, and I raised my face to the stars. Then I spoke out loud, as though the night would answer. This quiet, it's my celebration. To the girl who learned to speak, to the scars that taught me to sing, to every hush that became a hymn. That morning, I woke early and went down to the riverbank. I sat on a rock, feet touching the water, quilt draped across my shoulders. I took out my journal, the same one with my 12-year-old poems inside. I flipped to today's blank page. I wrote, "Today I celebrate the quiet that became my voice, the wounds that shaped my wings, the songs that found their way home." I left the words behind on the rock. The tide might carry them, or maybe someone else might find them someday. If they did, they'd find the map of my journey there. Back at home, I joined Mama and Dad in the kitchen. She handed me a plate of leftover jambalaya. He hugged me. She kissed my cheek. I smiled like I used to when I was a kid, not forced. Not because I had to look happy, but because I felt enough. That afternoon, I walked downtown. I slipped into the old church where I first sang, took a seat in the back pew, and closed my eyes. Sunlight streamed through stained glass, colors fractured into the dusty aisle. I sang softly, just lines I remembered. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound. I didn't project, didn't need an audience. I sang to the empty church and to every space I once feared. And when I finished, the silence came back, but this time it felt like an echo of acceptance, not fear. On the way home, I took a detour to Pawpaw's old house. The yard was cleaner now, no boarded-up windows, fresh paint on the trim, no slamming door, just a quiet neighborhood home. I didn't knock. I doubled back to the river's edge instead. Evening fell, and I ended the day sitting with Dad on the porch. We didn't speak much. Spoken love is nice, but sometimes trimmed words care more. I dipped my hand into his. He squeezed. I leaned my head on his shoulder, and that was celebration enough. Later, I climbed into bed and took the quilt off, folded it so neatly it looked new. I tucked it beside my pillow and slept under a night of nothing but soft breeze and peace. When I woke, the quilt smelled like home and healing. There were no pages left in the quilt untended, no doors rattling in my silence, nothing left to lock. I'm 18 now, and college is counting days, not years. Every milestone is a sunrise that carries the weight of everything I've carried. Yet in that stretching dawn, I'm learning one truth. What belongs to me stays with me. My voice, my story, my scars, my songs. Nothing else. I wake early, quilt folded at the foot of my dorm bed. The mirror Dad gave me now hangs on my wall, reflecting a woman I recognize. Bravery in her eyes, warmth in her smile. I run my hand over the frame and think, this reflection belongs to me. Classes begin, and the hallways hum with possibility. I meet students who don't know my story, and that's freeing. My name, my face, not defined by trauma, not labeled the survivor. I am June Delacroix, student, singer, daughter of resilience. Choir rehearsals are loud and bright. I sit in the front row, my voice no longer trembling. This semester I'm singing Total Praise in the spring recital. The solos aren't a spotlight, they're a declaration. This sound is mine. Those old walls on Appleyard can't shatter me. I visit Baton Rouge on weekends. I walk to the riverbank and sing into the current. The water lifts my voice from grief into possession. The river doesn't return my echo. It carries it further, to places I haven't been. Back in the dorm, I host study sessions and reading circles. I speak up, challenge, laugh. Just me. No one hides behind a quilt. I use my voice to lift others when they lose theirs. I learn what it means to build, not just rise. One morning, I receive an invitation to speak at the college's Women's Forum. They know my story, the poem I published, the solos I performed. They want to hear how a quilt and a voice can carry a woman through the darkest nights. I accept. On stage, I stand beneath soft lights. I don't wear the quilt. Instead, I hold a folded piece of yellow fabric. It's the smallest scrap from the original quilt. I say, "This yellow once held fear. Then I held it. Now I hold it here. Not as armor, but as art. I give it to you in witness. You belong to your story, and your story belongs to you." The audience stands. Warm faces, shimmering applause. I step off stage and feel the ground under my feet. I belong here. In Baton Rouge for spring break, I walk through church doors again. My church, not my cage. The quilt waits quietly in a pew. I touch it gently, cross to it, and lay a new hymn book on top. It's a message we don't say often. The past can rest, but what you build on its foundation belongs to you. I take my place in the choir loft. My voice blends and stands. My heart sings without trembling. I belong to this melody, this moment, this movement forward. On my birthday, someone sneaks into my dorm and tapes a note to my mirror. "You are enough." No signature, just truth on glass. It makes me tear up because I know the importance of that message. I write in my journal that night. Today I claimed what's mine. My breath, my voice, my life. May every note I sing and word I write say, "This belongs to me." I look in the mirror and whisper, "June Delacroix, I belong to me." Then, I fold the quilt. I don't hide it, but I don't carry it either. It lives calmly beside me now, an heirloom of healing, not a burden. I sleep soundly, not just dreaming, but living. For the first time, fully, deeply, wholly, myself. The day I sang for the last time under that old sanctuary's stained glass felt nothing short of holy. My diploma was framed on my dorm room wall, my quilt folded nearby, but this moment was the culmination of every secret song, every whispered prayer, every unlocked note. I stepped into the sanctuary early, the morning sunlight streaming across pews like ribbons of hope. My heart felt heavy with memory and light with promise. I carried the smallest scrap of yellow cloth in my hand, a piece of the comfort that once held me, now offered as symbol of redemption. Pastor Page greeted me at the door. His eyes glistened. I nodded and walked down the aisle. The choir loft felt like a stage and a confession. The moment the accompanist struck the first chord, I closed my eyes and let the river of memory flow into song. I've known sorrows, cried silent streams, but grace found me through broken dreams. Now my voice rises, roots to sky. This is my prayer, my final cry. Each note held years, lock clicks, quilt folds, mirror reflections, river baptisms. But this was no lament. It was a declaration. I stood whole, sound, free. The song ended in stillness, then applause, soft, sustained, reverent. I opened my eyes to faces I loved, faces I didn't know, faces who needed to hear what song can heal, that voice can save, that silence can break. That afternoon, we gathered in the fellowship hall, plates of jambalaya and king cake. But the real feast was in the stories shared. Women spoke about wings. Girls cried soft, amazed by what courage sounded like. Even Pastor Page shed tears and said, "June, you gave us a gift, and it belongs to the world." Later, Walking home under oak trees, I felt every step rooted and rising. The city felt different. No. Longer home, but not entirely leavable. A place that held both what was and what would be. That evening, Dad and Mama surprised me with a song of their own. They sang Amazing Grace, their voices shaky at first, then strong. I joined in. Our voices blended, and all the doors closed softly behind us, washed in harmony. Before they left for the night, Mama hugged me tight and said, "Today, you finished a song you started way back." Dad kissed my forehead. "You're not just June Delacroix, you're joy." And in that embrace, I knew. The last song wasn't the one I sang at the podium. It was the one sung in whispers and breath between us, healed in notes of belonging. That night, I placed the yellow cloth and a new hymn book in the pulpit's drawer. I opened the mirror in my dorm and looked at myself, fully mine, fully here. What belongs to me stays with me. I whispered it, a vow and a prayer. There was no grand ceremony, no camera crews, just me, the quiet hum of my dorm, and a morning where the light seemed softer than usual, the kind of light that says, "You made it." I brewed coffee, opened my journal, and realized I had nothing left to hide, no locked doors in my mind, no unsung stanzas. I wrote, "Her voice was the ending, not silence, not rage, but the sound of a woman who lived." I closed the book and stared at the quilt, folded perfectly on the shelf, not as a relic, not as a crutch, but as something sacred I no longer needed to carry every day. It had done its job, and so had. I looked around my small dorm room, the mirror, the yellow scrap, the framed photo of me singing at the youth festival. They were no longer reminders of pain. They were testaments of everything I overcame. That night, I went to the chapel on campus one last time before moving into my first apartment. I walked to the center of the stage, took a deep breath, and sang. Not for anyone, not for applause, just for myself. It wasn't a hymn, it was mine. Soft, wordless, rising like a river finally free. Of rocks. After the final note, I smiled. The silence that followed felt like peace. Outside, the stars blinked like they always had. But I was not the girl who begged them to listen anymore. I was the woman who had finally been heard. If you stayed with me through this whole story, thank you. This wasn't easy to tell, but maybe it helped you unlock something you've been carrying too. So tell me in the comments, what city are you in? I want to know who's out there listening, really listening. And if any part of my story sounded like a piece of yours, hit the like button. That tells me I'm not alone. Subscribe if you haven't yet. I've got more to say, not just for me, but for every woman still living in silence, waiting to be heard. Because no matter what they took from us, our voices still belong to us. And this one was mine.